Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Raju Singh China. I work as a Director of Gastroenterology at Fortis Hospital, Ludhiana. First of all, congratulations to Dr. Vitul Gupta for organizing yet again a very informative, very important conference in these terrible COVID times of MAPICON 2021. The lecture which he has given me is on upper GI tract hemorrhage, and he wanted me to keep it simple so that we are able to get across to the people who are in the audience who will be general practitioners. Now, what is upper GI bleed? Next slide. What is upper GI bleed? Any bleeding which happens proximal to the ligament of Treats in the second part of the duodenum is called a upper GI bleed. And how does it manifest? It manifests as hematemesis, खून की उल्टी, melena, black tarry stools, or hematochezia, which is fresh blood in the stools. Now, there are two terms we should be careful and we should be knowing. One is a occult GI bleed, and the other is a obscure GI bleed. Occult GI bleed basically stands for bleed which we are not able to find out what is the cause. Obscure GI bleed, on the other hand, is a bleed about which we are not able to find out the cause after upper GI and a colonoscopic examinations. Now, how do you distinguish upper GI versus lower GI bleed? This becomes very important because on the basis of this, the whole protocol of management is resting. Now, upper GI bleed versus lower GI bleed, if you have a hematemesis, खून की उल्टी, it is upper GI bleed for all practical purposes. If you have upper GI bleed, there is a cecal gurgling once you palpate the abdomen. There is generally no tenesmus. Tenesmus is pain on passage of stools. And if you get a blood urea testing done, it may show you a raised urea. Now, we come over to the etiology of upper GI bleed. There are various etiologies. I would be only dealing with the important etiologies which we have. The most important investigation which is there, which helps in upper GI bleed, is this endoscopy. And this is how the endoscopic pictures look like on a normal endoscopic examinations. This is the esophagus, and here we can see at times the things which I'll come and show you in the next few slides. This is the LES junction. The scope is entering the stomach, and you see the greater folds, the greater curvature folds. This is going towards the antrum. That is the pylorus. That is the hole which is seen there. And you even can see a linear antral gastritis sort of a thing here. And this is a NBE picture, which probably makes it even more clearer on what we are seeing. Now, basically, upper GI bleed can be divided into two parts. It can be a varicose bleed or a non-varicose bleed. Now, non-varicose means not from varices. So, common causes of them are a peptic ulcer related bleed. And if you can see here, you have the different types of a peptic ulcer, duodenal ulcer. In the D picture, you see a clean based, this here you see a clean based ulcer. Whereas in picture A, you can see a ulcer with a arterial spurter. You can see this arrow which is showing you, this is the arterial spurter. Now, endoscopic management of upper GI bleed is, this is a video.
Peptic ulcer bleeding is the most common source of
I'll just go
non-variceal
along.
upper gastrointestinal bleeding.
This is an endoscopic examination going on.
In this patient, an ulcer with an adherent clot was found in the duodenal bulb.
So this is the ulcer with the adherent clot. You can see clearly there is a clot here, big clot.
Is usually defined as a clot resistant to forceful irrigation or suction.
So adherent clot is one which cannot be removed with forceful irrigation.
Ulcers with an adherent clot are classified as 2B ulcer according to the Forest classification. These ulcers are associated with a rate of rebleeding above 20% if endoscopic treatment is not performed.
So this is important. More than 20% of them with the adherent clot with
Before
rebleed.
proceeding to endoscopic therapy, it is important to check for other bleeding sources, and gastric biopsies should be taken as part of the investigation of possible H. pylori infection.
So H. pylori needs to be
Regarding
absolutely
treatment, we
ruled out
recommend
whenever you are
quadrupole
dealing with a
injection
duodenal
of
ulcer.
monoquats of 1 milliliter of diluted adrenaline.
This is the injection of adrenaline being given in this video.
When injecting diluted adrenaline, the needle is inserted about 3 millimeters from the bleeding point in order to avoid intravasal injection. The total volume injected depends on the type of ulcer.
So this was the typical duodenal ulcer bleed. So one of the important causes of non-varicose bleed would be a peptic ulcer bleed. Now there is a high prevalence of peptic ulceration with NSAIDs treatment. NSAID treatment is given left and right across people, right? All sorts of NSAIDs. And if you see in this graph, you can see this blue one. Blue one is the aspirin, the graph for the aspirin. This one is the aspirin graph. You can see it here. And aspirin and Dispirin are few of the drugs which have to be taken with a lot of caution, because a lot of people come to us with bleeding because of aspirin or Dispirin intake. The other drugs also cause peptic ulcers and can cause bleed. This is how erosive bleed would look like on a picture. You can see these erosions: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is another cause of upper GI bleed. If a patient retches very forcefully, there is a tear which happens at the lower end of the esophagus, and this tear is generally, this is the tear which happens at the lower end of the esophagus, and this is known as a Mallory-Weiss tear, and this is another cause of a bleed with upper GI bleed. Another cause is a Delphois lesion, and if you see here, the picture is not very clear, but if you see here, you can see that there is a blood oozing out from a vessel. The vessel is not very clearly seen, and if you can see this area which I am trying to show with a marker, this is the area where the blood is oozing out, and this is a diaphragm lesion, and this needs to be injected, or it has to be APC has to be done, or a clip has to be put to stop the bleeding. This is how it would look like on a endoscopic picture. This is the blood coming out on a diaphragm lesion, and it needs to be really managed very aggressively. Another cause of upper GI bleed, which is non-varicose, is the GAVE. And you can see the changes in the stomach. You can see changes here, and people with portal hypertension generally have a lot of GAVE. And this needs to be managed with a APC spray or a APC burning so that the bleeding stops. Other cause of a upper GI bleed, which is non-varicose, is esophagitis. If you have a peptic ulceration or reflux, you can get a esophagitis, and this can also lead on to a bleed. So those were the common causes of non-varicose bleeding in a patient who comes to you in the OPD. 1, a peptic ulcer. 2, drug-induced. 3, Mallory-Weiss. 4th, esophagitis. And there are other causes also, like you have a Dalfrei's lesion, or you have a GAVE, or even malignancies, carcinomas, sometimes lymphomas, tuberculosis of the stomach. And there are multiple other causes, but these were the important causes. So the important causes would be gastric ulcer, oblique duodenal ulcer. 2, gastric erosions due to drugs, commonest aspirin, Dispirin. And thirdly, esophagitis. And fourthly, I showed you a Mallory-Weiss tear and a Delphois lesions. And then there are other causes which are relatively unimportant causes. Then varicose bleed. Varicose bleed is the bleeding which happens from the varices. Now, in this video, you can see an endoscopic examination, and what you see, these linear streaks are the varices. So these linear streaks are the varices. You can see them. These are the varices which are seen in the esophagus, and these varices rupture and lead on to a bleed many of the times. So you can see this. So you can have esophageal varices, which happen in the esophagus, and then you can have gastric varices. And how do we generally manage them? You can see in this picture, you can see these gastric esophageal varices clearly, and we manage them with a band ligation. What we do is we have a band ligator, we put it over the endoscope, and then we suck in the varix and apply a band on it, and this band is able to stop the bleeding in most of the cases. The other form of varices which happen are the gastric varices or the fundal varices. If you see this clearly, this is the endoscope, this is a retroverted view, and you see gastric varices which appear like grapes, or a bunch of grapes in the fundal area, and these are relatively difficult to manage, but generally glue injection is given into them to stop the bleeding for them. So this is a sclerotherapy of the varices. Sclerotherapy was done earlier. These days, we generally do not revert to sclerotherapy. Sclerotherapy is injection of a sclerosing agent into the varix to stop the bleeding. What we normally do these days is banding, which I showed you. A band, generally 4 to 5 bands are put. We had an analysis at DMC for a period of 30 years, and at least in North India and Punjab, the commonest cause of upper GI bleed was esophageal varices, followed by gastric erosions, peptic ulcer, Mallory tears, GI malignancy, esophagitis, and few in which we could not find the cause of a GI bleed. That was a very low percentage. Now, the important thing is as the patient comes to you, you make up your mind after an endoscopic examination and routine investigations that what is the protocol you are treating. So the protocol which you are treating now basically means, are you dealing with a variceal bleed or a non-variceal bleed? Then at the same time, you have to gauge what is the severity of the bleed. Rule of the thumb is if the systolic blood pressure is less than 100, pulse rate is more than 100, or the orthostatic fall in blood pressure is more than 10. That means you make the patient stand, take his blood pressure, and there is a fall in the blood pressure. The blood loss is more than 1 liter. This has been the classical rule of thumb for almost 50 years, and this still holds true. In a clinical setting, systolic blood pressure less than 100, pulse more than 100, orthostatic fall in blood pressure more than 10 millimeters, blood loss more than 1 liter. Severe GI bleed, if there is a decrease in the hematocrit by 6%, decrease in the hemoglobin level by 2 grams, and you need transfusion of at least 2 units of black red cell blood. This is the, so at the outset, you gauge what is the severity of the bleed. Now, what is the general management and initial medical therapy in an upper GI bleed? Nothing is impossible. This is one of the dams which has been built by the humans to stop the flow of one of the biggest rivers. And there are minerals on top of this dam wall. And this little ibex, it's called an ibex, and it will climb a absolutely vertical dam. And you'll see that they go there to get the salt from there, and see the drop. It is more than 200, 250, 300 feet. But their need for the salt is so overwhelming that over a period of time they have developed. Why I am trying to show you this video is not because of anything else, but for the simple reason that nothing is impossible. And we must keep our eyes and ears open to new things. We must think out of the box, and we must try to find out things which we can do for upper GI bleed management at a peripheral center. It is not necessary that an endoscope is a must. It is preferable. And you can see this ibex almost climbing, it climbs almost vertically. And if they can do it, humans can obviously be doing a little better over a period of time. So in a crisis management, you rush to the emergency. You generally do not get ambulances like this. This is a Hummer which belonged to my friend in the United States of America. So I thought to get a picture clicked just to show you that crisis management requires a lot of input from your side, and you have to be very, very aggressive in managing upper GI bleed. Now, the ABCD of upper GI bleed management is airway, breathing, circulation, drugs, and endoscopy. The airway has to be maintained, breathing has to be proper, circulation, please push in fluids as soon as possible. Normal saline is one of the best to push in case of a GI bleed. Then there are drugs. People had used metoclopramide to ampullstat. People had used vasopressin. People have used other drugs for it. And then the endoscopic examination becomes important because it is able to, you are able to do a therapeutic protocol for the problem. Now, what are the indications for upper GI scopy? Hematemesis, melena, severe pain, weight loss, unexplained anemia. These are all reasons why we should get a upper GI scopy done. Now, there was a concept that give thanda pani, baraf wala pani, ice saline, that is out. It leads on to more problems. Whenever you put in a Ryle's tube, please wash with normal water at room temperature. That is helpful. There is no need to give this ice saline and ice water. Which patients need endoscopy and when? This is important. This is a Blatchford score. If the Blatchford score is high, then obviously the patient needs the upper GI endoscopy very fast. There's a Rockwell score also. I don't think so. You should go into details of this, but a Blatchford score, any score which is more than 6 needs under urgent management. That means if there is a massive bleeding, if there's a drop in hemoglobin, and if there is a rise in urea, you must think of urgent endoscopic processes. Now, what are the modalities for management? Non-varicose and varicose. Peptic ulcer, I showed in the first slide. If there is a visible vessel, we can inject it. We can inject adrenaline, we can inject sclerosing agents, we can do a APC. Now, endoscopic risk stratification is needed. This is a Forest classification, which helps if you have a clean based ulcer. That is the last. If you, the first picture I showed you of a clean based ulcer. If you have a clean based ulcer, patient need not be admitted. You can easily manage the patient actively at home treatment also. But if there is an active spurting bleeder, that is a Forest 1A, the picture which I showed you A in the initial phases, then the patient needs to be hospitalization. Now, this is A. You see this? This is A, picture A. This is an active spurter. This needs hospitalization. But if you have a base like this, you can even manage conservatively. Now, role of endoscopic hemostasis, there are different modalities available. Generally, two modalities are used for active arterial bleed, a visible vessel, because it has been found that if you use two modalities, a sclerotherapy and an APC or a heater probe and a gold probe, something, you have to use two modalities together so that the risk of rebleeding becomes less. The risk of rebleeding from a peptic ulcer decreases significantly 72 hours after the initial episode of bleeding. So 72 hours, 3 days is the period. 3 days is the period which is important for general practitioners to see. So I told you the hemostasis can be maintained by sclerotherapy, by thermal probe, by dual therapy, hemostatic clips, and this is how we do it. This is one of the videos in which sclerotherapy is being given. I think we have seen it. Which medications reduce the risk of rebleeding? H2 blockers and PPIs. But it is important that you use only PPIs because the H2 blockers are not able to take care of the pH so well. So whenever you have an upper GI bleed, use proton pump inhibitors for managing, and PPIs can be given at the rate of 8 milligram per hour as an infusion over a 72-hour infusion, and that is very helpful. Pre-endoscopic proton pump inhibitor is recommended as a stopgap, and you must get an endoscopy done. These are all the recommendations. I will not go into the controversies of PPI, octreotide and somatostatin. I think we should leave it for centers which deal with it. Is there any role of second look endoscopy? Not recommended for most patients with peptic ulcer disease, but if you have a varicose bleed, then obviously multiple times endoscopy has to be done to eradicate the varices. Who should be treated with surgery? So any patient who rebleeds after 2 sessions of endoscopy should be taken up for angiography. If the angiography is not able to take control of it, the patient should be referred to surgery. So 2 episode sessions of endoscopy followed by angiography. And still, if we are not able to take care of it, then go in for the fourth protocol, that is the surgery. Uh, how and when should patient be followed up after their initial episode of upper GI bleed? It is the first 72 hours which are important. Take care of the patients for the first 72 hours. And then after that, if the patient has a clean based ulcer, you can discharge him. But if the patient has a spurter or something else, you have to be taking care of them in a much more aggressive manner. Prevention is always better than cure. And I have no doubt in this because of my SPM lineage. My father, Dr. Harcharan Singh, was one of the most well recognized people in community medicine in the country. And he was always of the opinion that prevention is better than cure. And I think prevention is the only cure. We should not be even saying that because most of the diseases which we treat as allopathic doctors, physicians, surgeons, many of them, I would say majority of them cannot be cured. Majority of the medical diseases at least can be prevented and should be prevented. Helicobacter pylori, it has been there over for 20 years. Any patient with duodenal ulcer needs to be treated for H. pylori, and peptic ulcer bleeding should be tested and treated for H. pylori infection. I will not go into the details of this. These are different videos. This is a picture of Gabe. This is a video of Gabe. How does one diagnose bleeding from a varix? You see the varix. This is how they look like. You do endoscopy. On endoscopy, you can see the things clearly. And if you are able to see this. Now, this is one thing which I thought all general practitioners of the country should be able to use. This is a Sengstaken Blakemore tube, and this is a very simple tube which has got two balloons, a gastric balloon and an esophageal balloon. And this is put through the nose or the mouth, and it can be inflated. And if you are able to put in this tube in a patient in a periphery, inflate the gastric balloon, give it a pull, you will be able to save 90% of people who have a varicose bleeding. This is very important because the patient will be stabilized till he reaches tertiary care hospitals. We don't have endoscopes in most of the places of the country still. So Sengstaken Blakemore tube should be an integral part of management of every GP in the country. It is called balloon tamponade. This is how it looks like. And this is very much needed to do this. This is a band ligator, and this is how the endoscopic banding is done. I have shown you some pictures of it. So we will not go. Then obviously, if you are not able to take care of the bleeding, upper GI bleeding due to any of these reasons, then something known as a transjugular intrahepatic portosystemic shunt can be done, which can be done only at very, very, very aggressive centers who have very good intervention radiologists. So tips is something like this. You put in a stent between the portal vein and this is the hepatic end, this is the portal end. So you cannulate the hepatic vein, go into the portal vein, push in a guide wire, over the guide wire, push in the stent. What happens is the flow from the portal side to the hepatic sides, which was compromised due to the liver cirrhosis or liver problem, any other liver problem gets okayed. So the flow becomes better and there is a fall in the pressures in the esophagus and the bleeding stops at time. There are certain shunt operations. These are at best left to places who have a great deal of expertise in it. And then finally, if you are not able to take care of the upper GI bleed due to underlying liver disease or cirrhosis or an end stage, then the best treatment becomes liver transplantation. And these are the people who need to be managed. Now, another questions. Antibiotics. Should you give antibiotics in upper GI bleed? Antibiotics in upper GI bleed has no use except 20% of cirrhotic patients who are hospitalized have a bacterial infection at the time of admission to the hospital. And infection develops in them in up to 50%. So if you have a patient with a chronic liver disease having upper GI bleed, please put them on broad spectrum antibiotics. Norfloxacillin, ciprofloxacillin, or levofloxacillin is okay. Factor 8A not available at most places. Outcomes about the mortality is about 5 to 10% at the best of centers, and there is a higher mortality if the age is more than 60 and patients with chronic liver disease. Last but not the least, I think once we are managing upper GI bleed in places where facilities are not available, like primary health centers at small towns, small cities, where endoscopy is not available, we should have our own protocols. How do we manage them? We should be using Sengstaken-Blakeman tube as a first treatment protocol. We should be able to put in a normal saline drip immediately in a patient. We should be giving oxygen to these patients and starting them an antibiotic wherever we are not sure whether the upper GI bleed is due to chronic liver disease or not. So are we not proud of a symbol? Yes, we are proud of our symbols. This is a lion, but it should have been a tiger. The peacock is our national bird. Hockey, they have started doing recently very well all across the world. And cricket, they have just won the second, third, fourth test match only yesterday. So congratulations to the Indian team. Are we not proud of our icons? Yes, we are proud of our icons. So similarly, we should be proud of what we do, what we think, and what we should be doing. The carry home message is resuscitate the patient, review the condition, and rush for an endoscopic examination. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for a patient hearing. And I wish you very well. Take care of yourself. Take care from COVID. Take care of the third wave. Let it not come. And best of luck and best wishes to you. Thank you so much.